Please be seated. Well, we've read the 23rd Psalm and we've sung a version of it. And I begin by making a few references to this much-loved psalm, "The Lord's my shepherd." A psalm that depicts God as someone who loves us and leads us, and then at the end receives us. In good times and in hard times, we're not alone. God is with us. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you, Lord, are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. God directs and protects me, the psalmist is saying. God guides and provides. He leads me beside quiet waters. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He guides me along the right paths. This beautiful image of God as a shepherd caring for his sheep, helping them to flourish. There's so much that we could say about Psalm 23, and in a moment we'll look at how Jesus picked up that image and applies it to himself, and how in the context of that he makes the remarkable statement that we just heard, I have come that they might have life and have it to the full. And then I'll say something about how those who have been blessed are meant to be a blessing to others. Those who have been recipients of God's goodness and kindness, those who have been recipients of grace, are meant to be instruments of grace. I think that's a governing rhythm in the Bible. Those to whom much is given, much is expected, much is hoped for. Those who have been shepherded are to shepherd others. That's the idea. And then I'll conclude by picking up on some of the things that Blaise said and Blaise shared with us, and how we might pray and work for refugees and asylum seekers, that they too might flourish. And I'll finish with a story in that vein. I don't know a lot about sheep. My mum grew up on a farm, the 12th of 13 children. They had a few sheep, and some of her brothers were shearers, and she used to always talk about Uncle Bob, who could shear 300 sheep in a day, and she'd always add proudly, without a nick. That was Uncle Bob. Annette and I lived up at Hornsby for 30 years, and in the last few, we lived right next to the school farm. It was an agricultural plot, and it often housed half a dozen or so sheep. Loved the rural smells. And once when I was teaching, somebody came into the classroom and said, "You've got sheep in your backyard." Turns out they'd jumped a fence, a 1.5 metre fence, and a hedge about 1 metre wide, and they jumped smack bang over the fence into our side wall, brick wall, and hit it with a thud, and fallen into the ditch, and then made their way out into our backyard where they were feasting in our backyard. Good thing they hit the wall and missed the lounge room window, not by much. Could have ended up with them in our house, but it's a wonder they didn't kill themselves. They were like sheep without a shepherd for a while, until our agricultural students rounded them up, took them back, raised the fence about 0.5 metre or so they couldn't get over. Who knew that sheep could jump so high? I've just about exhausted my sheep stories, but I do have one more, and that's last Sunday. I was driving over here and listening to the 7 o'clock news on Radio National, and I wasn't quick enough, because probably my least favourite show on Radio National is Australia All Over with Ian McNamara. Sorry to say. Sundays with Macca. But I left it on and I got involved. A bloke called Kevin had rung up, and he'd had 400 sheep that had been stolen. And turns out stock theft is really common in Australia. Richie, you might be able to tell us more about this. Serious problem. $5 million stock theft each year, I heard on this program. And it's probably 5 times more than that, because there's a delay in reporting and many stock thefts are underreported. And it impacts farmers financially, but in other ways as well. Highly organised crime, all hours of the day and night, insiders involved. And anyway, Cameron Whiteside came on. He was the head of a team of about 50 or so New South Wales rural crime investigators. He backed up what Kevin had said about his 400 sheep, told some other stories about other people who had lost numbers of that order, reinforced the prevalence of theft, and had some really interesting things to say about GPS satellite tagging and how that looks promising and how it's being developed in the University of New England. Anyway, I got, thank God for Sundays with Macca in the end. Enough. Point being, sheep theft is common in our day. And it must have been in Jesus' day as well, because in the passage that we had in our gospel reading, Jesus accuses the religious leaders, the heavyweights of his day, the Pharisees and others, of not caring for the people and of being like thieves and robbers who aim to steal, kill and destroy. Whereas he says, I am the good shepherd. And he makes that remarkable claim that in contrast to these others, he says, I have come that they might have life and have it to the full. And in his very next breath, I am the good shepherd. And there's language that's reminiscent of the 23rd Psalm, as Jesus speaks of himself as the good shepherd who loves his sheep, so much so that he'd lay down his life for them. He's prepared to do that. He loves them, he knows them, he leads them, he calls them by name. They recognize his voice, they follow him, they go in and out and find pasture. And then our reading finished. I have come that they might have life and have it to the full. Now, the language of well-being and thriving, flourishing, living life to the full is very much part of many of our schools and workplaces at the moment. And based on the words of Jesus and our own experience, I think there are many of us here as Christians who would want to affirm that Jesus has indeed enabled us not just to survive, but to thrive and to flourish. We could tell a story or two in connection with those words that he says, where those remarkable words, I have come that they might have life and have it to the full. Who are the they? I have come that they might have. Well, as we read through the Gospels, it's clear that Jesus came for one and all, for all and sundry, for each and everyone. But as we read through the Gospels, we also see that he does seem to have a heart, he does seem to have a preference for those who are struggling in one way or another. Like the man born blind that we could read about in the section just before if we had time. And our little passage is pretty much a response to that. Think of also when Jesus said, imagine somebody has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 and go after the one lost sheep until he finds it, then puts it over his shoulders and brings it home, calls his friends and neighbours and says, rejoice with me. Jesus is here for one and all and sundry, but he has a heart for the one lost sheep. He has a heart for all who are struggling. And today, as we think about those who have lost home and people, and maybe even their name for a while, and possessions, and are looking for a new home in a new land, what a good passage to have before us. I have come that they might have life and have it to the full. A young woman, Farhat Kohistani, escaped Kabul in August 2021. You may remember that that's when the United States and allied military forces, including Australia, withdrew from Afghanistan after a 20-year occupation, leaving Afghan citizens at the mercy of the Taliban. As the Taliban entered the capital, the lives of all young girls changed in an instant. Just before they entered, Farhat Kohistani escaped She escaped with only the clothes on her back and a phone. And she eventually made her way to Australia. She secured a protection visa and she returned to the classroom. One of our Anglican schools opened their hearts, opened their doors, made available its resources, seeking to share their advantage with somebody who was disadvantaged. And yes, she was disadvantaged, but she was also strong. She is also strong and extraordinary, and she's been a blessing to that school community. Farhad's dream is to be a journalist, to finish her school studies, to go to university, and to help people, particularly persecuted women and girls, back in Afghanistan. That school's dream is to sponsor people like Farhad, to shepherd Farhad and others, and by so doing to emulate and to follow in the footsteps of the one who said, "I have come that they might have life and have it to the full." Those of us who love the 23rd Psalm and love to say, "The Lord's my shepherd," do well to point others to that same Lord, and also do well to ask ourselves, and who can we shepherd? For we're blessed in order to be a blessing to others. Amen.